The cool, recycled air of the penthouse boardroom during an emergency call did little to stir the fine dust I'd painstakingly brushed from the 6th century Carpathian fibula resting on the polished mahogany table. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance of ancient bone and earth, paused. My current contract, authenticating a private collection of early medieval artifacts, felt a universe away from the insistent buzz of my secure line. I glanced at the panoramic view of the city, a glittering grid of lights against the bruised twilight sky, before answering. "Seth here." "They need you at Blackwood Manor," a gruff voice stated, without preamble. It was the lead investigator from the regional task force, a man whose respect I'd earned over years of sifting through the grim stories the earth sometimes held. Alistair Finch. Apparent fall. The name Alistair Finch hit me with the force of an archaeological discovery. The historian. The celebrated academic whose exhaustive texts on forgotten legacies filled half my personal library. And Blackwood Manor? A historical landmark, steeped in local lore. A place I'd always wanted to explore under different circumstances. An apparent fall for a man like Finch at a place like Blackwood sounded less like an accident and more like a carefully phrased dismissal. My gut, an organ usually reserved for processing obscure dietary requirements during field excavations, tightened. "Details?" I asked, already gathering my field bag. The fibula, forgotten, lay glinting under the recessed lights. From the upper balcony, landed on the stone courtyard. Preliminary assessment from the local patrol officer suggests a tragic misstep. Foul play isn't suspected, but, well, it's Finch and it's Blackwood. The chief wants a thorough look, no stone unturned. You're the best for the bones. I'm on my way. The drive was long, a winding descent from the city's concrete arteries into the encroaching rural darkness. The modern hum of the highway eventually gave way to the rustle of overgrown hedgerows and the distant croak of unseen frogs. Blackwood Manor itself emerged from the gloom like a slumbering beast, a sprawling edifice of dark, rough-hewn stone, its Gothic spires silhouetted against a sliver of moon. It was an estate steeped in narratives, a place where history wasn't just recorded but felt, an almost palpable presence in the cool night air. The sort of place where stories clung to the very walls, and secrets often lay buried just beneath the surface. Emergency lights pulsed faintly in the distance, a stark modern intrusion against the manor's ancient facade. I parked my vehicle alongside a line of official sedans and a single, unmarked white van. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled my nostrils, overlaid with the metallic tang of something else. The undeniable signature of recent trauma. The lead investigator, a burly man whose patience wore thin with every passing hour on a scene, met me near the main entrance. His face was a mask of fatigue, but his eyes held a flicker of expectation when they landed on me. "Seth, glad you could make it. Messy business." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the manor, where a cluster of officers stood under temporary floodlights. "The local sheriff's deputy is convinced it's an accident. Said he slipped. No witnesses, no signs of forced entry, nothing obvious." "Nothing obvious is often where the truth hides," I murmured, adjusting the strap of my bag. We walked around the side of the building, past manicured but now neglected gardens, towards the scene. Dr. A. protective tarp had been draped over his upper torso, but his legs and one arm were exposed. The impact had been severe. I donned my gloves, the familiar latex stretching over my knuckles, a ritual that always grounded me. The lead investigator stepped back, giving me space, understanding my process. I approached slowly, my eyes scanning the perimeter first, then narrowing in on the victim. My gaze took in the shattered fragments of a terracotta planter nearby, the scattered earth, the subtle discoloration on the stone. The initial examination was meticulous, a silent conversation between myself and the remains. I noted the precise angle of his fall, the trajectory suggested by the blood spatter, the nature of his injuries. the broken planter, the disturbed soil, all consistent with a fall. The deputy's assessment seemed to hold up, at least superficially. But then, my eyes caught something. It wasn't pollen, nor was it the local limestone dust from the courtyard. It was distinct, unlike any particulate I'd observed on the balcony railing above or the flagstones below. My fingers, practiced in discerning the minute, brushed lightly against the fabric, and a few microscopic motes transferred to the latex. I moved to his left hand, partially obscured by his body. The fingers were slightly curled, as if clutching something or perhaps pushing off. As I gently manipulated the limb, my brow furrowed. There was a delicate fracture on a metacarpal bone, too clean, too precise for a chaotic, uncontrolled tumble. A fall usually resulted in blunt force trauma, crushing injuries, or widespread shattering. This was different. This was a singular, focused break, almost surgical in its neatness. It spoke of a concentrated force, not a sprawling impact. The initial assessment screamed accident, but the dust and the bone whispered something else entirely. The details were minute, anachronistic, out of place in this narrative of a simple, tragic fall. Alistair Finch had fallen, yes, but I knew, with a certainty that prickled my scalp, that he hadn't fallen alone. This wasn't just a death. It was a story waiting to be meticulously unraveled, and I had just found the first faint thread. The tension in the air thickened, heavy with unspoken questions. The manor's shadow clung to us as we rounded the corner, the overgrown ivy a skeletal hand against the gray stone. The lead investigator, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, gestured towards a section of collapsed scaffolding near a crumbling wall. "That's where they found him, Seth," the investigator stated, his voice a low rumble. "Dr. Finch. Apparently a fall. Construction was happening, or supposed to be." I scanned the scene. The scaffolding looked ancient, rusted, hardly fit for any serious work. The ground was a mix of loose soil, scattered stones, and what looked like centuries of accumulated debris. Broken roof tiles, fragments of brick, and desiccated leaves. "Any witnesses?" I asked, my gaze fixed on the sheet. "The groundskeeper found him at dawn. Said he heard nothing last night. Just another tragic accident, is the initial assessment." The investigator's tone was weary, as if he'd seen too many of these. I didn't reply immediately. Tragic accidents usually didn't leave me with this persistent hum of unease. I approached the body, my kit bag slung over my shoulder. The forensic technician, a young woman with sharp, observant eyes, was already documenting the immediate vicinity, her camera flashing softly. I knelt beside the sheet, pulling on my nitrile gloves. The air chilled slightly, though it was likely my own anticipation, not a change in temperature. "Ready, Seth?" the technician asked, pausing him work. I nodded, then carefully peeled back the sheet. Dr. Finch's body lay contorted, an unnatural angle to his neck, his limbs splayed. He was dressed in tweed, a thick academic fabric, now soiled with grime and what appeared to be dried blood. His glasses were missing, his face pale and slack. The initial assessment of a fall seemed plausible at first glance. The impact trauma was significant, concentrated on the head and upper torso. But my work rarely stopped at first glances. I began my preliminary examination, my eyes tracing the lines of impact, the discoloration of the skin. My fingers, gloved, moved with a practiced delicacy, probing, feeling. The investigator stood a respectful distance away, watching. Then my phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion into the somber tableau. I pulled it out, annoyed by the interruption. The display showed an unknown number, but the prefix suggested a private high-security line. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Seth here." "Finch, what's the status?" A voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the line. It was distorted by a slight echo, a metallic quality that spoke of expensive conference equipment. I could almost picture the source. A glass table, polished wood, the cityscape spread out beyond a floor-to-ceiling window. The distant clink of a coffee cup, the murmur of other voices in the background, confirmed my suspicion. The setting felt so distant, so incongruous with the damp earth beneath my knees. "I've just started my examination, Director," I replied, keeping my voice level, though a spark of irritation flickered within me. "Initial observations are consistent with a fall, but I'm far from concluding anything." "We need this wrapped up quickly, Seth. Finch was a prominent figure. The media is already circling. A tragic accident, no complications. That's the narrative. Just confirm it." The voice held an edge, a barely concealed demand. "My job isn't to confirm narratives, Director. It's to find the truth," I stated, my gaze sweeping over Dr. Finch's lifeless form, my resolve hardening. "I'll provide my findings when they're complete and accurate, not a moment before." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a clipped, "Keep me updated." The line went dead. I pocketed the phone, a frown etched on my face. The pressure was already mounting. It always did when someone important died. But that only fueled my determination. I turned my full attention back to Dr. I started with the skeletal structure, carefully palpating for points of trauma. The severe head injury was evident, but as I moved my fingers along the clavicle and ribs, I detected something subtle, a series of minute, almost imperceptible depressions. I leaned closer, adjusting the portable lamp the technician had set up. Under the focused beam, I could just make out tiny hairline fractures on the anterior surfaces of the third and fourth ribs. These were not consistent with a direct fall from height onto a flat surface. A fall would typically cause more widespread blunt force trauma or fractures on the posterior side from impact with the ground. These fractures suggested a localized compressive force before the fall, or perhaps even during it, but from a very specific narrow point of impact. They were inconsistent with the reported trajectory. My attention then shifted to his clothing. The tweed jacket was thick, matted with mud and debris. I used a pair of fine-tipped tweezers to collect samples from the fabric, placing them into sterile evidence bags. As I carefully brushed away some of the coarser soil, I noticed a fine, almost shimmering dust clinging to the fibers, particularly around the shoulders and cuffs. It wasn't the dull gray of plaster or the reddish-brown of local clay. This dust had a peculiar, almost luminous quality, a faint opalescence when caught in the light. It was a mineral dust, certainly, but its color and texture were unfamiliar. I'd studied soil and mineral composition from hundreds of sites across the globe, from ancient burial mounds to modern crime scenes, and this particular particulate matter was not native to this manor, or indeed, any geology I was familiar with in this region. I collected several samples of the dust, meticulously scraping them into separate bags. The tiny fractures, the unusual dust, these were not the hallmarks of a simple, tragic accident. Finch hadn't just fallen. He had been put there. And the truth, I knew, was hidden in the details that everyone else was too eager to overlook. The director's voice still echoed in the sterile quiet of the penthouse boardroom, a thin, demanding rasp that grated against my resolve. "My job isn't to confirm narratives, Director. It's to find the truth." I'd said it and I meant it. The line had gone dead, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of expensive coffee and the oppressive weight of corporate power. I gathered my field kit, the heavy canvas bag feeling solid and reassuring in my grip. My jaw ached from clenching it, but the defiance felt good, a necessary fortification against the pressure already mounting. My first stop was a compact, windowless lab tucked away in the building's lower levels, a place few outside my department even knew existed. I found the material analyst hunched over a microscope, the glow of its light illuminating the fine lines of concentration etched around their eyes. They barely glanced up as I approached, accustomed to my abrupt arrivals. "I need a rush on this," I stated, placing a small, sealed vial on the counter. Inside, a pinch of the strange, gritty dust I'd collected from the estate shimmered faintly. "Focus on mineral composition. Anything unusual. Anything that doesn't belong." The analyst grunted, a non-committal sound, and carefully transferred a speck of the dust onto a slide. I watched, impatient as they adjusted the focus, their fingers moving with practiced precision. Minutes crawled by, punctuated only by the soft hum of the equipment and the distant thrum of city traffic. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Well, this is interesting, Seth," the analyst murmured, their voice low. They gestured for me to look. I leaned in, peering into the eyepiece. Under magnification, the dust wasn't merely grit. It was composed of minute crystalline fragments, each catching the light in a peculiar way. It's a silicate primarily, but the trace elements, a distinct signature. High concentrations of cerium and lanthanum, indicative of a monazite deposit. And not just any monazite. The isotopic ratios are specific to a very particular geological formation. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Where? There's a known, though largely undocumented seam of it in the Blackwood Peaks region. Remote, heavily forested, and notoriously unstable terrain. It's not something you'd find in a typical urban or even rural environment. Not unless it was brought there. Blackwood Peaks. Finch had been spending an increasing amount of time there, according to the estate groundskeeper, under the guise of hiking. But Finch didn't hike. Finch excavated. The pieces were starting to coalesce into a disturbing picture. The drive was long, the paved roads quickly giving way to gravel, then to little more than overgrown tracks. My vehicle bumped and jostled, kicking up plumes of dust that coated the already parched foliage. The Blackwood Peaks lived up to their name. Ancient pines loomed, their branches heavy with shadow, blocking out the afternoon sun. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of loam and decaying leaves. I followed the coordinates Finch had marked in a cryptic entry in his personal journal, an entry I'd found hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his study. After nearly 2 hours, the track ended abruptly at a makeshift clearing. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Ahead, partially obscured by dense rhododendrons, I saw it. A crude excavation site. Shovels and picks lay scattered, some half buried in loose earth, as if work had stopped suddenly, violently. This wasn't an officially sanctioned archaeological dig. This was clandestine, and the dust beneath my boots felt sickeningly familiar. I spent an hour documenting the site, taking samples, photographing the crude shoring and the distinct layering of soil. Finch had been digging for something specific, something deep. The air hung heavy with the scent of disturbed earth and something else. A faint, metallic tang. Finch's estranged research assistant, a young woman named Clara, had been harder to track down. She'd vanished from public view shortly after Finch's death, reportedly holed up in a dilapidated rental cabin on the outskirts of the nearest small town. She clutched a threadbare blanket to her chest, her knuckles white. "I know you were working with Dr. Finch," I began, keeping my voice level, non-threatening. "About his research in the Blackwood Peaks." She flinched at the mention of the location. I don't know anything. I haven't seen him in weeks. Not since... Clara, I found the site. The dust I collected from the estate. It matches the soil there. Finch was excavating something. Something important. I watched her closely, seeing the tremor in her hands, the flicker of fear in her eyes. He died in what's being called an accident, but I don't believe it was. And I think you know why. She bit her lip, her gaze darting around the cramped, dusty room as if seeking an escape. He changed. After he found the first fragments, he became obsessed, called it the lost artifact, a key to a forgotten history. He kept saying it would rewrite everything. What fragments? I pressed. What kind of artifact? He wouldn't say, just that it was ancient, unlike anything he'd ever seen. He started having these meetings, late at night, not with other academics, with others. They'd come to the estate, sometimes to the site itself. He became secretive, agitated. She hugged the blanket tighter, her voice barely audible now. He said they wanted it, whatever it was. He said they'd stop at nothing. Who were these men, Clara? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know their names, just that they were powerful, and they scared him. He was afraid he'd unearthed something too dangerous to reveal. My gut tightened. Finch hadn't just stumbled upon an artifact. He'd uncovered a secret, a legacy these enigmatic figures were desperate to protect. And he'd paid the ultimate price. The air in the small cabin felt suddenly charged, the danger palpable. I had my lead, and a target was now painted squarely on my back. My gut tightened, a cold knot forming deep in my stomach. And he'd paid the ultimate price. I had my lead. The next morning, with the first tendrils of dawn painting the sky in muted grays and purples, I navigated my rental vehicle down a winding, unpaved track mentioned in Finch's hasty notes. The estate grounds were vast, sprawling, and far more neglected than the main house suggested. The track led deeper into a dense copse of ancient oaks, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Eventually, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing that housed the historian's primary archaeological dig site. What struck me immediately wasn't the antiquity, however, but the recent disturbance. I crouched, running a gloved hand over the disturbed ground. My gaze swept the perimeter. Near a cluster of tarps, meant to protect exposed sections from the elements, I spotted it. A faint circular indentation in the soft soil, consistent with the base of a small cylindrical object. A bucket, perhaps, or a canister. And then, a glint. Half buried in the disturbed earth, nestled against a newly exposed stone, was a fragment. I carefully excavated it, brushing away the clinging soil with a forensic brush. It was a shard of pottery, no larger than my thumb, its surface a deep, rich ochre. But it was the decoration that made my breath catch. Intricate geometric patterns, sharp and precise, were etched into the clay, then filled with a startlingly vibrant cerulean pigment. The style, the specific shade of blue, the very clay itself. It was anachronistic. It didn't belong to any known period of settlement in this region, nor did it match the indigenous pottery styles I was familiar with. It spoke of a different culture, a different time, perhaps even a different continent. This wasn't just an ancient piece. It was a piece that shouldn't be here. As I carefully bagged the fragment, the crunch of gravel heralded an unwelcome arrival. It was the detective assigned to Finch's case, the same one who'd initially dismissed my findings at the manor. "Still at it, anthropologist?" the detective asked, his voice rough, lacking any trace of cordiality. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed over his chest. "I thought we'd established this was an accident. The paperwork is almost done." "The paperwork is premature," I countered, standing slowly, the bagged pottery fragment clutched in my hand. "There are signs of recent, unsanctioned activity here. And I've found something that complicates your accident narrative considerably." I held up the evidence bag. The detective squinted at it, his brow furrowing. "A piece of old pot? What's that got to do with anything?" His tone was dismissive, almost aggressive. "Look, I'm getting calls. Important people want this wrapped up. Stick to bones. Leave the investigation to us." His gaze flickered to the freshly disturbed earth. This is just an old dig site. People poke around. Someone was here looking for something specific and they didn't want Finch to find it. The detective's jaw tightened. "My orders are to finalize the report, unless you have definitive proof of foul play that isn't a piece of old pottery. I'm closing this case." He turned, his message clear. The pressure on him was immense, and he was ready to push back, hard. I watched him go, a sense of isolation settling over me. They weren't just resisting. They were actively trying to shut me down. It only fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about Finch anymore. It was about the truth, buried under layers of official convenience and powerful influence. Later that afternoon, as I was reviewing my preliminary findings in my temporary workspace, my phone buzzed with an urgent call. It was a colleague from my lab, his voice tight with alarm. "Seth, you need to get back here. Now, what happened?" Someone got into the main forensic lab. No forced entry, no alarms triggered. It's like they had a key. Nothing was overtly stolen, but things were moved. Your personal research station specifically. The news hit me like a physical blow. I barked instructions into the phone, adrenaline surging, then threw my gear into my bag. I was already in the car, speeding towards the city. The mandatory location was now forced upon me, a meeting I hadn't anticipated. I arrived at the city's central investigation headquarters, my stomach churning. The room, usually a sterile environment for high-level briefings, felt charged with a different kind of tension. My colleague, the head of security, and a local precinct captain were also present, their expressions mirroring the director's. "Seth," Director Albright began, his voice clipped. "We have a serious situation. Your lab was compromised. The security footage shows an individual, masked, entering through a service entrance at 0200 hours. They bypass the internal locks with what appears to be a sophisticated electronic key. No equipment, no sensitive files from general storage. They went directly to your workstation. We found your field notes from the Finch case laid out on your desk, open to the pages detailing the anomalous findings. And your microscope was subtly shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if someone had used it to examine something, then replaced it." My mind raced. They didn't want to steal. They wanted to see what I knew. They wanted to send a message. The anachronistic pottery fragment, the disturbed dig site, Finch's warning, it all converged. Someone was watching me, following my every move. A target had been painted indeed. The city lights blurred into streaks of white and gold outside the panoramic windows, reflecting in the dark, lacquered table where I now sat. The break-in at my temporary quarters was still a raw nerve, a chilling reminder that my work was being watched. I held the pottery fragment, the one I'd found near the historian's supposed fall site, under a portable stereo microscope, its tiny details magnified 100-fold. My fingers, usually steady, had a faint tremor as I adjusted the focus. The fragment, no larger than my thumbnail, was ostensibly from the Proto-Hesperian period, an obscure civilization known for its distinctive geometric patterns and deep ochre glazes. I'd spent countless hours studying their genuine artifacts. The surface texture, initially convincing to the naked eye, revealed inconsistencies under high magnification. The microscopic pores, which in genuine ancient ceramics would show irregular erosion patterns from millennia of burial, here appeared unnaturally uniform, almost too perfect. It was as if a modern abrasive had been used to simulate weathering, but without the organic randomness of time itself. Then there was the glaze. Proto-Hesperian glazes, fired at lower temperatures, often exhibited microcrazing and mineral deposits unique to their ancient firing processes. This fragment showed none of that. Instead, I detected minute, almost invisible flecks of a synthetic polymer, a binding agent utterly impossible for the period. My breath hitched. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a deliberate fabrication. The pigments, too, gave it away. Under UV light, the ochre glowed with an unnerving uniformity, lacking the subtle variations of natural earth pigments. I ran a small, non-invasive spectral analysis, confirming my suspicion. The chemical composition of the pigment contained trace elements indicative of modern industrial dyes, not the mineral oxides available thousands of years ago. This wasn't an accidental anachronism. This was a sophisticated, meticulously crafted forgery. And not just any forgery. It was designed to mimic the rare and highly specialized Proto-Hesperian style. Finch wasn't merely researching an esoteric ancient civilization. He was on the verge of exposing a massive, high-stakes operation. This wasn't about theft. It was about deception, about manufacturing history for profit. The implications solidified in my mind, each piece clicking into place with a sickening thud. The sterile air of the boardroom felt suffocating. I packed my equipment, my movements precise but driven by an internal urgency. If Finch was exposing a forgery ring, then the people behind it were dangerous, resourceful, and desperate. They had already sent me a message. Now, I needed to find Finch's message to me, or to anyone who would listen. I knew exactly where to look next. Finch's study, the nerve center of his research, had to hold more. But I couldn't go back openly. My presence was already noted, perhaps even tracked. I needed to move with the same stealth as the people who'd breached my own temporary residence. Hours later, under the cloak of a moonless sky, I returned to the estate. The security guard was a different person tonight. An older man with a weary gaze who barely registered my presence as I signed in. I used my lock-picking tools, a skill learned during my early days of crime scene investigation, on the study door. It clicked open silently. The room was as I'd left it, a mausoleum of knowledge. But now, my perception was entirely different. I wasn't looking for clues to a fall. I was looking for evidence of a conspiracy. My eyes scanned the overflowing bookshelves, the stacks of papers, the heavy oak desk. Finch was a man of meticulous order despite the apparent chaos. He would have hidden something important, something only he could find, or someone who knew how he thought. I started with the desk, running my hands along the underside, checking for false bottoms, tapping the wooden panels. Nothing. My gaze fell on a large, framed map of the Mediterranean, an antique chart detailing ancient trade routes. It hung slightly askew on the wall behind the desk. Too perfect. I reached out, my fingers brushing the heavy frame. As I adjusted it, I felt a faint resistance. Not the usual friction of old wood against plaster, but a subtle spring-loaded mechanism. My heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. I pressed gently along the edges of the frame. A soft click echoed in the quiet room. Inside, nestled among a few loose papers, were two items. The first was a small military-grade USB drive, its casing dull and scuffed. Encrypted, undoubtedly. The second item was a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. I unfolded it carefully. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The real reason for Finch's death. The secret he was trying to expose. I held the drive and the coded map, the weight of their contents settling heavy in my palms. I was no longer just an investigator. I was now a target, holding the very information that had cost Finch his life. Longer felt like myself. I wasn't prepared to give them, not yet. Not without digging deeper into the digital breadcrumbs I'd managed to extract from the historian's study. A single, stark overhead light illuminated the dark, lacquered table where I now sat. A stark contrast to the dim, dust-moted beams of the estate. The city outside, a frantic tapestry of blinking red and white, seemed to mock the quiet intensity of my task. I had a colleague's laptop open before me, its powerful processor humming a low, reassuring tune. Beside it, a portable scanner, still warm from its use at the estate, held the fragile, coded parchment. His impatience was a palpable weight in the room, but I ignored it, focusing instead on the arcane symbols swimming across my screen. The parchment wasn't a map in the conventional sense, not with cardinal directions or topographical features. It was a network, a web of interconnected sigils and stylized representations of forgotten landmarks, each linked by intricate, almost microscopic lines. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running various decryption algorithms against the encoded text I'd extracted from the historian's encrypted files. The first few attempts were fruitless, spitting out gibberish. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. This wasn't a simple substitution cipher. I kept my gaze fixed on the screen. It's a complex encryption. Old-world techniques, merged with modern digital obfuscation. The historian wasn't just a scholar. He was a gatekeeper. I took a deep breath, recalibrating my approach. I remembered a particular academic paper, an obscure treatise on medieval hermetic ciphers I'd stumbled upon during my doctoral research. It was a long shot, but the patterns on the parchment, the way certain symbols repeated with subtle variations, felt familiar. A flicker. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the character stream. It was a start. I isolated the segment, feeding it into a frequency analysis program. The results were tantalizing. Not full words, but fragments, proper nouns emerging from the digital chaos. There, I murmured, my voice barely audible. A pattern. Hours bled into one another. The city lights outside sharpened, then softened, as the dawn began to paint the sky a bruised purple. The head of security had retreated to a corner, silently watching, a monument to controlled anxiety. My focus narrowed to the point of tunnel vision. The hum of the laptop, the faint click of the keys, the scratch of my stylus on a digital notepad as I mapped connections. These were the only sounds that mattered. Then, a breakthrough. A block of text resolved itself. It wasn't a complete sentence, but a phrase, stark and chilling. The legacy, preserved through the keepers. My eyes widened. I pushed harder, applying another layer of decryption, cross-referencing the newly revealed text with the coded map. The sigils, once abstract, began to align with locations, not just forgotten landmarks, but specific private holdings. Estates, warehouses, underground bunkers, a network spanning continents, not just a single historical site. The files spoke of the legacy as a collection of genuine artifacts, priceless and historically disruptive, capable of rewriting established narratives. And the keepers? Not just custodians, but active manipulators. The files detailed their methods, subtle alterations to historical records, strategic placement of forgeries to discredit inconvenient truths, the quiet acquisition of genuine pieces that could expose their machinations. This wasn't just about a dead historian and a few illicit trades. They didn't just want money. They wanted control over the narrative itself. Another section of the files decrypted, revealing names. Not just collectors, but prominent figures in academia, finance, and even government. Wealthy patrons, all connected to the keepers. My stomach tightened into a knot. This conspiracy was vast, reaching into the highest echelons of power. I zoomed in on the coded map, now partially deciphered. One of the highlighted locations, a specific symbol resembling a stylized serpent, coincided with the estate I'd just left. The historian hadn't just been a victim. He'd been part of this network, perhaps trying to expose it, or perhaps simply a pawn whose usefulness had expired. They were deliberate, a calling card, or perhaps a warning. I had uncovered something far more dangerous than simple foul play. I had peeled back a layer of history, revealing a powerful, unseen hand. And now, I was holding the evidence. My eyes widened. Estates, warehouses, underground bunkers. A network of shadowed properties, each a potential repository for secrets, or worse. The sheer scale was unsettling, but one particular estate, nestled deep in the northern highlands, caught my attention. Its historical footnotes were sparse, almost deliberately erased, yet the map marked it with an elaborate ancient symbol I'd seen only once before, in a long discarded manuscript belonging to the prominent historian. The city stretched out below us, indifferent to the storm brewing within these walls. I laid out the digital map on the central display, the glowing markers indicating the newly deciphered locations. These aren't just random sites. I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me from the decryption. The prominent historian's coded map, cross-referenced with the mineral dust analysis from the scene. It points to something far more organized than a simple black market operation. The chief investigator, a man whose patience was as thin as his graying hair, leaned forward. Organized how, Seth? We're talking about a fall, a tragic accident. His gaze flickered to the government liaison, who remained impassive, arms crossed. The mineral dust, the anachronistic details on the victim's remains. They don't lie, I insisted, bringing up a magnified image of the microscopic particles. This specific mineral composite is unique. I traced its geological signature to a very isolated region, known for a particular type of ancient quarry. That quarry happens to be located within the boundaries of this private estate. I tapped the glowing marker on the Northern Highlands, the same estate highlighted on the prominent historian's map. The government liaison finally spoke, her tone measured, devoid of emotion. A private estate. Owned by whom? That's where it gets complicated, I admitted. The ownership history is deliberately obscured, a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore trusts. Concern crossed the government liaison's face, quickly masked. Rumors, Seth, are not evidence. Perhaps not, I countered, but the prominent historian's map, his research into ancient trade routes. Now this mineral dust leading to a historically significant but privately controlled site. It's too many coincidences. I believe this retired curator holds a key piece of the puzzle. The chief investigator sighed, running a hand over his scalp. And you want to chase down an old academic on a hunch? It's more than a hunch. The prominent historian was reaching out to him just before his death. A tacit acknowledgement that my findings, however speculative, couldn't be ignored. I left the sterile boardroom and drove directly to the address I'd found in the prominent historian's files. A quiet, leafy suburb, far removed from the city's frantic pulse. The retired curator's house was a testament to a life lived among books. Towering shelves visible through every window, obscuring the view of the street. He answered the door himself, a gaunt man with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that held the weary wisdom of decades spent sifting through history's dust. His initial reluctance was palpable, a defensive wall built from years of academic discretion. Seth, he said, his voice raspy, I heard about the prominent historian. A tragedy. He tried to close the door, but I gently placed my hand on the frame. Sir, I believe it was no accident, I stated, watching his eyes for any tell. The prominent historian was investigating something dangerous. Something called the Keepers. The name hung in the air, a phantom bell tolling in the quiet hallway. The retired curator's jaw tightened. He hesitated, his gaze darting to the towering bookshelves behind him as if seeking refuge. You shouldn't be speaking that name so openly, he whispered, finally stepping back, allowing me entry. Come in, quickly. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and pipe tobacco. He led me to a small study, cluttered with artifacts and research papers. He offered me a seat, then sank into his own, his shoulders slumped. The Keepers, he repeated, his voice barely audible. I warned the prominent historian. I told him to let it go. He picked up a smooth, river-worn stone from his desk, turning it over and over in his hand. They are not a myth, Seth. They are real. A society ancient and deeply entrenched, dedicated to controlling archaeological finds. Not for preservation, but for power. For political leverage, financial gain. They manipulate the narrative of history, bearing what doesn't serve their agenda, elevating what does. My mind raced, connecting his words to the prominent historian's fragmented research. To the coded map, to the missing artifacts from the initial estate. There behind the illicit trade of ancient artifacts, I concluded. More a statement than a question. He nodded slowly. And they are ruthless in protecting their secrets. The Brotherhood of the Stone was just a local chapter centuries ago. The prominent historian was getting too close. He was piecing together their network, their specific holdings. The Northern Highlands estate, I pressed. The one with the ancient quarry. Is that one of their primary sites? He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, a profound weariness etched on his face. Yes, it's one of their oldest. A deep well of forgotten history, and a primary source for the very minerals they use to mark their finds. to authenticate their illicit trade. The anachronistic mineral dust, the prominent historian's death, the coded map, and now the retired curator's reluctant confirmation. The unique mineral dust I'd painstakingly identified on the victim and at the initial scene was, as the curator confirmed, a signature of the Keepers, originating from that specific remote private estate in the Northern Highlands. The estate was not just a point on a map. It was the heart of their operation, a nexus between ancient history and a very modern, very deadly conspiracy. My path forward was clear and dangerously direct. The penthouse boardroom, usually a sanctuary of muted power, felt like a pressure cooker. The city skyline, a mosaic of pinprick lights against the bruised twilight, offered no solace through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My hand, still gripping the cold receiver, trembled almost imperceptibly. The retired curator's voice, raspy with fear and regret, had just confirmed my gravest suspicions. The anachronistic mineral dust, the prominent historian's death, the coded map, all pointed to a single dangerous truth. Elias Thorne's estate wasn't just a collector's paradise. It was a front. I ended the emergency call, the click echoing in the sudden silence. I couldn't wait for official channels, not when the evidence was so volatile, so vulnerable. I had to go. Now. The journey to Thorne's estate was a blur of winding roads and increasing isolation. The GPS guided me deeper into the countryside, the last vestiges of civilization fading into dense forest. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. I parked my vehicle a mile down a secluded access road, hidden beneath a canopy of ancient oaks. I moved like a ghost through the perimeter forest, my eyes scanning, interpreting the landscape as I would an archaeological stratum. I looked for anomalies, for disturbed earth, for the subtle signs of human passage that security systems often overlooked. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer caught my eye near a low-lying section of the boundary wall, where ancient ivy had grown thick. A weak spot, perhaps an older section of the estate wall that hadn't been fully integrated into the modern grid. I approached cautiously, my senses heightened. The ivy, thicker than my arm in places, concealed a narrow fissure, a natural seam in the old stonework. It was tight, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, but it was my best bet. I shimmied through the gap, my clothes snagging on rough stone. I was in. The immediate challenge was navigating the inner grounds without triggering the more sophisticated infrared and laser grids. My target, according to the coded map, was a detached structure, ostensibly a guest house, tucked away behind the main manor. It was a modern addition, sleek and unassuming. The exterior, however, bristled with a discreet but advanced network of sensors. I found a service entrance, less fortified than the main doors, and meticulously worked the locking mechanism. My fingers, accustomed to delicate bone fragments, now coaxed tumblers into alignment. The door clicked open with a soft sigh. I slipped inside, pulling it shut behind me. This was a laboratory. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating workbenches laden with specialized equipment, high-resolution microscopes, laser engravers, chemical baths, and an array of pigments. Partial artifacts lay scattered. A Roman coin with a fresh patina, a Greek amphora shard undergoing chemical aging, a Mesoamerican jade mask awaiting its final touches. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of modern solvents and the earthy scent of ancient minerals. The very mineral dust I'd found on the victim, now present in industrial quantities. This was it. A state-of-the-art forgery workshop, churning out fakes indistinguishable to the untrained eye. The scale of the deception was staggering. But the curator had mentioned something else, Thorne's true legacy. I ran my hand along the surface, feeling a subtle vibration, a faint hum. There, a concealed mechanism. My fingers probed, searching for a seam, a switch. A barely visible panel gave way, revealing a biometric scanner. I didn't have Thorne's prints, but I had something else, The curator's coded map. It wasn't just a map. It held a sequence. The air inside was cool, dry, preserved. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a collection of fakes. This was the real trove. Shelves lined with genuine, priceless artifacts. Egyptian funerary masks, pristine and vibrant. Sumerian cuneiform tablets, their edges still sharp. Mayan stele fragments, their glyphs telling ancient stories. Each piece was meticulously catalogued, its provenance detailed in a ledger lying open on a central plinth. Stolen from legitimate archaeological sites, undoubtedly, their true histories erased, their value perverted. This was Thorne's true legacy. Not forgeries, but plunder. My internal thoughts were a cacophony of triumph and horror. I had found it. The proof. But the triumph was fleeting. Red lights flashed, casting a lurid glow over the ancient treasures. Thorne's advanced security systems had detected my presence. The metallic clang of heavy doors slamming shut somewhere within the guest house sent a jolt of ice through me. I was trapped. I spun, my eyes darting frantically. The vault entrance was already beginning to retract, the heavy wall sliding back into place. I lunged, throwing myself through the narrowing gap just as it sealed shut with a deafening thud. The workshop was bathed in flashing red light. A voice, synthesized and calm, boomed from hidden speakers. Intruder detected. All exits sealed. Security forces inbound. I heard the distant wail of sirens growing louder. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. I scrambled, my forensic training kicking in. Analyze, adapt, escape. I remembered a ventilation shaft near the ceiling, barely noticed on my way in. It was a long shot, too small for a casual escape, but I was desperate. I overturned a workbench, creating a makeshift platform, then leaped, my fingers scraping for purchase on the cold metal grate. My muscles screamed as I pulled myself up, forcing my body into the cramped, dust-choked tunnel. The sirens were deafening now, the sound of heavy boots thudding just below me. I crawled, propelled by pure adrenaline, the metallic scent of the workshop replaced by the stale air of the ventilation system. I had the proof, the undeniable evidence. But now, I was a hunted man. The voice on the other end had been clear, concise, and chillingly anonymous. They know you're close. Finish your work, Seth. My initial theories, once abstract deductions, had solidified into a tangible threat. I wasn't just investigating a murder. I was digging into something far older, far more entrenched than I'd imagined. Thorne wasn't just a historian with a secret. He was a gatekeeper, and I had just kicked down his door. I dropped the receiver back onto its cradle with a clatter that sounded deafening in the stillness. Time was no longer a luxury. It was a weapon they could use against me. Minutes later, I was threading my sedan through the city's arteries, the anonymous warning replaying in my mind. The destination was a secured, temporary workspace I'd established in an abandoned textile factory on the industrial outskirts. A place far from prying eyes, where the only witnesses were crumbling brick and forgotten machinery. The air there always carried the faint metallic scent of rust and damp concrete, a fitting backdrop for the grim truths I unearthed. My portable lab was a sterile island under the harsh glare of halogen lamps. The workbench was strewn with an array of forensic tools, high magnification loupes, micro tweezers, sample slides, and a powerful digital microscope tethered to a high-resolution monitor. Spread across a large light table were dozens of crime scene photographs. Wide shots of Finch's estate, close-ups of the victim's remains, intricate details of the disturbed soil, and minute traces found on clothing fibers. Each image was a fragment of a puzzle, waiting for its rightful place. I began methodically, my movements precise, almost ritualistic. First, the soil samples. I had collected a unique, clay-rich loam from the specific area of Finch's supposed fall, a composition that, even to the untrained eye, seemed out of place for that particular elevation of the estate. Under the microscope, I compared it to the minute traces I'd painstakingly scraped from the soles of Thorne's expensive leather shoes, confiscated during a cursory interview. The visual match was immediate, striking. The specific mineral inclusions, tiny crystalline structures unique to that particular soil bed, were identical. Thorne had been there. He hadn't just orchestrated it. He had been on site. Next, the fibers. A microscopic tuft of an unusual rough-spun linen, dyed with an ancient, almost forgotten pigment, had been found clinging to Finch's jacket. It was a detail I'd initially dismissed as a relic from the estate's historical collection. Now, I cross-referenced it with an obscure textile analysis I'd found in Thorne's research papers. A detailed study of an ancient tapestry, rumored to be housed in his private collection. The spectral analysis of the dye, the weave pattern, the very degradation of the linen. It all aligned perfectly. The tapestry was a signature, a calling card. Each click, each zoom, each confirmed match was another brick in the wall of my case. The anachronistic details at the scene, the ones that had first piqued my suspicion, weren't anomalies. They were deliberate. The specific type of mineral inclusion in the soil, the antique linen, the method of simulating the fall, these were all hallmarks of the Keepers, the clandestine society dedicated to preserving their illicit trade in ancient artifacts and their forgotten legacy. Finch hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. He had become a target of their archaic, ruthless justice. And Thorne, the revered historian, was not merely a member, but a key player, enacting their brutal will. My breath hitched. It was all there. Finch's death wasn't an accident. Thorne had moved Finch's body, leaving the distinct soil signature. He had used the ancient linen from his own collection, a symbol of the Keeper's antiquity, to signify his involvement. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Thorne. The anonymous warning replayed. Be careful who you trust. The local authorities, perhaps even some of the regional investigators I'd been working with, could be compromised. Presenting this evidence wouldn't just be solving a murder. It would be declaring war on an organization that had clearly demonstrated its willingness to kill to protect its secrets. My life was now squarely in the crosshairs, but there was no turning back. I had built an unassailable case, a forensic blueprint of Thorne's guilt and his intricate connection to the Keepers. The digital presentation, a meticulously organized sequence of photographs, microscopic analyses, and comparative data, was almost complete. I reviewed each slide, each piece of evidence, hardening my resolve. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second a reminder of the danger closing in. I saved the file, secured the workspace, and stepped back into the bruised twilight, ready to face whatever came next. The deadline hummed with the phantom echo of a threat. They know. The words didn't just hang in the air of the penthouse boardroom. They resonated deep in my bones, a cold tremor that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I slammed the antiquated receiver down, the clatter sharp in the sudden silence. The cityscape sprawled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a million indifferent lights. Time was no longer a luxury. It was a rapidly dwindling commodity. Thorne had been playing a longer game than I'd initially conceived, a game I was now an unwelcome piece in. My reflection stared back from the glass, determined, a faint sheen of sweat on my brow. I moved to the large, polished mahogany table, activating the integrated display. Finch's humorous, inconsistent with a simple fall, the peculiar residue found beneath his fingernails, later identified as a rare mineral composite indigenous to only a few remote mining sites Thorne's company had recently acquired. I overlaid the topographical maps of those sites, highlighting the anomaly. Then came the spectral analysis of the soil samples from the manor grounds, showing traces of an ancient adhesive, almost identical to one used in the restoration of a priceless Sumerian tablet I'd seen in a private collection catalog. A collection known to be Thorne's. This is it, I muttered, my voice raspy. All of it. I didn't hesitate. I found the lead detective's direct line and dialed. The connection crackled, then a gruff voice answered. "Detective," I began, my voice tight with urgency. "It's Seth. I've got everything. The fall was a fabrication. Dr. Finch was murdered, and Thorne is at the center of a vast operation. They know I'm onto them." Then, "Seth, slow down. What are you talking about? Murder? We ruled it an accident." "I have forensic proof," I insisted, my gaze sweeping across the projected images. The anachronistic damage, the mineral evidence, the adhesive. It all points to a struggle, a deliberate act, and a cover-up designed to look like a tragic fall. And the motive? An illicit trade in artifacts orchestrated by Thorne. Finch was too close to exposing the Keepers, Thorne's organization. "The Keepers?" the detective scoffed. "Sounds like something out of a pulp novel." "It's real, detective," I pressed, my voice dropping to a low, intense tone. I just received a veiled threat. They're aware I'm unraveling their threads. If we don't act tonight, the evidence, or worse, I, might disappear. Another pause. This one felt different, laced with a flicker of recognition. "You're at the penthouse boardroom, right? Stay put. I'm dispatching a unit, don't touch anything else." "No," I countered, surprising myself with the vehemence. "I need to be there. I know the manor's layout, the specific historical details Thorne might use to conceal things. My expertise is crucial to locating their illicit caches." The detective sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "All right, Seth, but you stay behind the perimeter. This isn't your jurisdiction for direct engagement." I agreed, knowing full well I wouldn't adhere to that last instruction if the situation demanded otherwise. The urgency was a palpable thing, a knot tightening in my stomach. Less than an hour later, I was in the passenger seat of an unmarked police cruiser speeding towards Thorne's sprawling estate. The lead detective, a stoic woman with sharp eyes, drove, her expression grim. Behind us, 2 more vehicles followed, lights off. This could ruin careers, mine included. "I'm certain," I replied, my voice unwavering. "The evidence is irrefutable. Finch deserved justice, and the historical integrity of these artifacts. A single powerful beam from one of the trailing vehicles cut through the gloom, revealing the ominous entryway. My gut clenched. This felt less like an investigation and more like walking into a meticulously laid trap. Only the chirping of crickets broke the stillness. "Stay here, Seth," he ordered, his hand on the door handle. He stood there, impossibly calm, a faint, predatory smile playing on his lips. A shiver traced my spine. He had known. "Mr. Thorne," the detective's voice was steady. "We have reason to believe you're involved in the murder of Dr. Finch and the illicit trade of ancient artifacts." Thorne let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. "Murder? Artifacts? Detective, you wound me. I'm a patron of history, a collector. And Dr. Finch's tragic accident was just that. Tragic." I couldn't stay in the car. Not with Thorne's eyes on me, not with his blatant denial. I pushed open the door, stepping out into the cool night air. The crunch of gravel under my shoes was loud. "It wasn't an accident, Thorne," I stated, my voice cutting through the manufactured calm. "I have the evidence, the microfractures on his humerus, the unique mineral residue, the ancient adhesive. He fought you, always so meticulous. But your evidence is circumstantial, easily explained away. A fall can cause many injuries. Residue? This is an old estate and a man of yore. Academic pursuits might be prone to overactive imagination." He took a step forward, his enforcers mirroring his movement. "You've stumbled into something far beyond your comprehension, my dear anthropologist." "The Keepers," I challenged. "Your network for plundering history and rewriting it for profit. Finch was going to expose your legacy of deceit." The flicker in Thorne's eyes was undeniable. A brief, raw spark of anger. "You speak of things you do not understand." His voice dropped, becoming a low growl. "You should have stayed in your laboratory, Seth. Now you forced my hand." One of the hulking figures behind Thorne moved, a swift, silent blur. It wasn't towards the detective or her backup. It was towards me. This was it. The confrontation I'd orchestrated, or perhaps walked into. I braced myself, my gaze darting for an escape, for a weapon, for anything that could turn the tide. I was an anthropologist, not a fighter, but I wasn't going to be another tragic accident. I braced, my muscles tensing. The hulking figure was fast, but my years of field experience, of anticipating trajectories and impacts kicked in. It wasn't a fight I was preparing for, not in the traditional sense. It was evasion. I twisted, dropping low, using the momentum of my own movement to pivot away from the initial lunge. The air whooshed where my head had been moments before. A sharp crack echoed through the cavernous space, not a gunshot, but the sound of a stun baton discharging. The detective's team was on it, a coordinated blur of movement. The figure grunted, stumbling as one of the backup officers, a broad-shouldered man, delivered a precise blow to its side. Thorne, momentarily distracted by the chaos erupting around me, snarled, his eyes darting. But it was too late. The tactical advantage he'd held, the illusion of control, had evaporated the moment the detective stepped out from behind the ancient tapestry. The room erupted. Not in sustained gunfire, but in controlled bursts of force. The detective, her face a mask of grim determination, moved with practiced efficiency, directing her officers. One of Thorne's other enforcers was already down, subdued by a flurry of well-placed strikes. Thorne himself, surprisingly agile for his bulk, made a desperate dash towards a concealed door, but two officers cut off his escape, their movements swift and decisive. He didn't even make it halfway before he was tackled, brought down with a heavy thud, his furious shouts muffled against the polished floor. I watched, my breath still catching in my throat, as the remaining enforcers were disarmed and secured. The air, thick moments ago with menace, now carried the acrid scent of ozone from the stun devices. I felt a strange sense of deflation, the intense focus of the chase giving way to the quiet hum of aftermath. The detective approached me, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "You okay, Seth?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, running a hand over my still thrumming temples. "Just a bit winded. You timed that perfectly." She offered a small, tired smile. "We had to be sure. He's slippery." She glanced at Thorne, now cuffed and being hauled to his feet. And dangerous. Days blurred into a week. The immediate aftermath had been a whirlwind of evidence collection, interrogations, and the slow, methodical dismantling of Thorne's illicit network. The air was charged, not with threat, but with the rapid-fire exchange of information and the clatter of keyboards. A projection screen dominated one wall, displaying a complex web of financial transactions, shipping manifests, overlaid satellite imagery. The recovery teams are still cataloging. A colleague, a specialist in cultural heritage protection, announced, pointing to a section of the screen detailing a warehouse raid in a remote port city. But preliminary estimates suggest we've recovered over 90% of the stolen artifacts, including the missing pieces from the historian's collection. A wave of relief, profound and unexpected, washed over me. The historian's legacy, once twisted and exploited, could now be restored. I thought of the fragile bone fragments, the anachronistic details, the quiet injustice that had set me on this path. It had all led here. The detective, seated across from me, her phone pressed to her ear, nodded grimly. "The warrants are going out now. The keepers are officially exposed. The media is calling it the biggest cultural trafficking ring in decades, tied to a far older, darker organization." My gaze drifted to the screen. Below the financial data, a series of historical documents and photographs scrolled. These were the true keepers, not just Thorne's network, but the generational cabal that had quietly funded, directed, and benefited from the illicit trade, all in service of preserving a twisted interpretation of history and power. Their names, once hidden in dusty archives and whispered in exclusive circles, were now plastered across digital news feeds. Their dark legacy, predicated on suppressing uncomfortable truths and hoarding priceless relics, was finally being brought to light. The emergency call wasn't just about the arrests and recovery. It was about managing the fallout, the reverberations across the globe. Some of the keepers had held positions of power, their influence far-reaching. The sheer scale of their operation, spanning centuries, was staggering. I felt the weight of it all, a heavy cloak of fatigue settling over my shoulders. The meticulous work, the constant analysis, the confrontation, the realization of how deeply entrenched this conspiracy had been. It had taken a toll. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by images of unearthed bones and ancient secrets. The relentless pursuit of justice through science, while profoundly satisfying, left scars. I'd walked into a realm far more dangerous than any academic conference, a world where history wasn't just studied, but actively manipulated and fought over. Later, as the boardroom slowly emptied, the detective lingered. "You did good, Seth," he said, his voice softer now. "More than good. You blew this wide open." I looked out at the city, a sprawling tapestry of lights. "I just followed the bones," I replied, the words feeling inadequate. "They always tell a story." She gave me a knowing look. Some stories are harder to hear than others. My work, once confined to the precise dissection of the past, had bled into a very real and present danger. The truth, once unearthed, couldn't be reburied. And I, Seth, the forensic anthropologist, had been instrumental in its resurrection. The thought of returning to the quiet sanctity of my laboratory, of simply teaching and researching, felt distant, almost quaint, and I had answered. The pursuit of justice, I realized, was rarely a clean affair, and I was ready to get my hands dirty again.